Welcome back, everyone. I know how much you all mostly hate my uranium videos, but bad news, I got another one. This one's going to discuss mostly inventories and how they will draw down and what type of path that might take and why timing this cycle, even if you have numbers, which, fair warning, we're going to use some rather rounded arbitrary numbers in this, is not simple. Now, I want to start off by saying that everyone has different supply demand pictures, numbers, whatever, and also inventory numbers are estimated at best. Now, I can guarantee that of all the people that have made supply and demand pictures, nobody has it exactly right. But that being said, some could be pretty good, some could be pretty bad. But everything used in this video and used by different people making models is an estimate based on approximate numbers. And there are certain questions, certain uh, facts or numbers that can't be exactly known. And you have to realize this before really understanding the nuances of the situation. So the following picture is from a presentation where Guy Keller from Tribeca was talking on, I believe, July 25th of 2019. And it talks about the inventory situation. There's 1 point whatever billion pounds of inventory, and then it breaks it down to who has it, where is it possible to be used. And so you look at all this inventory, and really the most relevant bit is at the top where it says available. So remember this picture because we're going to break it down even further for the available part. So as I said, it's quite relevant to remember that this chart also is an approximation and also is from 7 months approximately into 2019, meaning by now 6 months have passed since then. So the numbers are probably slightly lower if our other assumptions are correct. Also, even at the time of this presentation, the EU utilities numbers was overstated. They were lower then. So a lot of the assumptions here are going to be all else equal assumptions, but again, I'm going to focus on the 75 at the top. So if any of you watch all of the videos I make, and please tell me that's no one, you'll remember that I talked about the slack in the uranium market in terms of demand that's traveling through all of the levels of inventory, and I mentioned it as a whipping motion traveling through a rope. So for this purposes of this video, I'm going to focus on and I know I've said this a bunch of times, but it's important, I'm going to focus on the available section because all of the other utility sections, trader sections, and even a number of inventories within the available section, I could argue, are working inventories, and they are at or towards the lower end of the average numbers, meaning they can decrease from here, but they can also increase from here, and it would be considered normal. So the bulk of the slack is in the section that I'm focusing on. So before I go into the math, the pluses and minuses of the situation, mostly minuses in this one, but it's important to remember that these 75 million pounds are somebody's asset. Presumably, they still own it because they think it is worth more than the current price, meaning they're kind of bullish on the situation. Now, some don't. Some are just stuck with it, maybe from a higher price, maybe whatever. But all of them are, in theory, eventually going to sell. But the price should matter in the situation. Okay, so let's start with the math. And remember, for this whole region, unless there's a specific number from some report somewhere, I'm going to be using approximate numbers that I believe are close to accurate. And so if you want to argue those points, well, that's a completely different argument, but feel free in the comments to tell me if you think my numbers are off or on or whatever. But anyway, 75 million pounds to start with. Let's say that was accurate at the point of the graph. Then you have the second half of 2019. And so I'm going to say then the second half of 2019, there could be a drawdown there of between 5 to 10 million pounds, potentially more, but let's use 5 to 10 million because let's start off with a bit of a base. So for the numbers going forward, I'm going to use 5, although I'll sometimes reference the potential for 5 more million of drawdown. So we're at, in theory, at the end of 2019, 70 million pounds. Now, if that available section includes Uranium Participation Corp, which has the equivalent of 17.25 million pounds now after getting rid of some of the UF6 and buying, basically trading the UF6 for U3O8, the U3O8 equivalent 17.25 million pounds, Yellow Cake 9.62 million pounds, and remember, for later argument's sake, they have 100 million in option agreements to buy. They can buy 100 million more every year. They didn't fully use it last year. I don't know if they'll fully use it this year. I made a point of saying as long as they're trading at a discount to NAV, I didn't think they would, and they didn't last year, but we'll see how this year unfolds. So once we subtract those numbers, we're at approximately 43 to 36 million pounds. Now, I want to split off our assumptions into two categories now. Let's go with that's all the available inventory that we want to count, and we don't want to count a few other things that I will get to in a sec. Okay, first assumption, first category, first line of thought is that. So 43 minus approximate 2020 deficit, maybe 15 million pounds, so we're at 28 to 23. And then if we go with the 2021 deficit, we're at, remember, 28 to 23, and the 2021 deficit might be 20 million pounds, again, approximately. So we're down to 8 to 3 million pounds. And remember, the reason I use 2 years going forward is because that's approximately how long it would take to increase production. So we are approximately done with the inventory now if we project where we will be in the future in this line of thought. Now here's the other line of thought. What if the suppliers was pipeline and fuel cycle suppliers and traders, and that didn't include Cameco, which in theory does have some available inventory, or companies like Cameco, I should say. Because at the end of Q3, Cameco had an inventory of 7.9 million pounds. Then there's Kazatomprom, which said in the statement that they like to keep an inventory of 6 to 7 months, which in theory at some point will be available for the market. So 6 months of attributable production is 16.9 million pounds in their inventory. And while we're on the subject of inventories floating around there, or that could have been, or that could be, remember Wolverdance and Uranium Trading Corp? Yeah, no, I've never heard of them. Nope, never. They popped up in 2018 or 2018, 2019, but never really fully materialized, but are kind of potentially still out there waiting. So using our other line of thought, 75 million pounds, minus 8 from the second half, minus 27, which in theory the physical funds won't sell, minus 25 from just Cameco and Kazatomprom, and then we're left with 15 million pounds out there, or 0 at the end of this year. But wait, there's more, as they say. Cameco, remember, if you'll remember, was supposed to be buying 10 to 12 million pounds-ish in the later parts of last year. Now, obviously, they didn't buy all of that. We'll see in the conference call exactly how much they did buy, I should say. But they had also mentioned that if they thought the price was going to be moving, they have more buying ahead of them than behind. So they could have been buying more than their allotted 12 million pounds for the end of last year to get ahead. Meaning, if they had done that, they could have had foreseeably all the inventory and been looking for more where there was no more available in the spot market. So, and again, they were supposed to buy a whole bunch this year, 10, 15, 20 million pounds from the approximately 15 million available. So by that logic, the spot market would run out of available supply in what, the second half of 2020? Now the problem is this is an approximation. So even if we have it dead on with the numbers, Cameco is just going to buy when it suits them. And they can also borrow from one of their partners. So they could push it back longer than reasonable. And that's not all in terms of what's challenging to time it. What if a new entity shows up, or what if one of the existing ones decides to downsize? Nothing is exact. And also, in addition to everything being an approximation, you look at the situation and no one wants to be the holder of the very expensive bag if all of a sudden utilities decide they want less fuel. So no one wants to be the one to be bidding up a price when there's no need to. And then you get back into the situation where everyone is waiting for someone else to do something. Let's go back to the first scenario for a sec, because this is where the it could take longer theory comes from. And I don't dispute, if you've seen what I said in the past, it could take longer, and I hope it does, and I'll get more into that later. But let's say the spot were to only really run out at the end of 2021. So basically for 2022. Well, if we're purchasing ahead the uranium, then we'd realize that now, because uranium isn't purchased tomorrow, but the uranium purchases are made approximately 2 years in advance. So if we figure things out in advance, then we'd be figuring out very soon. But if people just assume that the uranium would be there on the spot market when they needed, it is possible that some of this slack, some of this pent-up demand that isn't materializing in the present, might only be noticed at the end of 2021. Now, this would mean that the production would arrive in 2024, and what this would cause would be a 40 to 50 million pound drawdown, maybe 40 minus 5, maybe 35, but a big drawdown from the inventories of the utilities, because there would be nothing on the spot market, nothing available in the future in the spot market for 2 years. So the inventories on the utilities balance sheet would be running down, and this might be a way for them to get quite concerned. But even then, it could take longer. Now, if we wanted to get into a more bearish or more bullish, depending on how you think this through, scenario, we could even go into what if the utilities feel so comfortable with the uranium supply that they want to move their working inventory from the long-term average 2 years down to 1.5 years. Well, then we would have some less buying going forward, meaning there's another basically up to 50 million pounds there of slack in the system, more inventory to run down to get to the neutral point. And while I would argue that we're more at the neutral point now, it is possible that the utilities run down the inventory. And even more possible, well, there's 27 million pounds in Uranium Participation Corp and Yellowcake. And while they claim that they're holding for the foreseeable future, if they start giving up and liquidate their holdings onto the market, well, then that's another maybe a year if they completely liquidate that we could last. And so these scenarios aren't base case, but if you want to get into a how could this take longer scenario, if that happens and the from what I mentioned before, the slack that we only find out the spot market is empty once someone goes to buy a pound and there's nothing to be bought, well then it's possible that the price only moves in 2023, 2024. So on one hand, even in our scenario where we excluded Cameco's and Kazatompром's inventory, we would be right now at a point where, once accounting for the supply lag for new supply coming online, we'd be approximately out of the excess inventory of U3O8. Now, once we factor in what could have happened with the buying in the past or potential buying now or whatever happens next, we could be any day, if not in the past, at the point where the price should have moved. But on the other hand, if we get into the scenario where everyone starts thinking they need less inventory, everything gets drawing down, people start selling what wasn't factored in, then it's not inconceivable that things could take 2, 3, or even 4 more years if everything worked on a what currently exists basis and everyone put things off to the last minute. Now, a few relevant things to remember. Fuel is purchased long in advance. So it's purchased long in advance and the contracts are set up. Does that mean it's always available on hand when it's purchased or it's always located when it's purchased? Not always. Some of it's below ground, some of it is in a will be purchased category. So while fuel is purchased, not all of that may transfer through to locating the fuel now. Also, remember that price is on the margin, meaning set by the last transaction. So all the people who own the U3O8 now, if they suddenly decided that the next sale was going to be 50 bucks, 70 bucks, whatever, and everyone wasn't selling for less, well, then that's where the price would be because the next transaction would be at that price. Now, this is also the reason why we have seen in the past that when it looked like the price was moving, that all of a sudden the volume disappeared because if people thought, oh, I can get more in tomorrow instead of trading it to hope to make a nickel today, who's going to be selling? But again, that only matters once it matters. And whenever the last pound is sold at $25 and then everyone remaining that owns a pound thinks it's worth more, well, that is only when the price moves. But in the same way that price moves on the margin, and this will really twist your brain a little, the drawdowns in this inventory also, well, the effect of them works on the margin, meaning because it takes 2 years for supply to come online, and this is again approximately and depends on the supply, then today's deficit or surplus, whatever your numbers indicate, doesn't matter. What matters is 2022, meaning let's say you were to think, and this is hypothetical, deficit 15 million pounds this year, 20 million pounds next year, 25 million pounds the year after that. Well, then it's the 25 that matters today and not the 15. So this means that things are changing faster than things are changing. So again, if we assume that we're currently at the neutral level for uranium inventories, because again, time delay and everyone keeping a normal amount of healthy working inventory. If that were now, then every day going forward is demand that is shifted from the present to the future. So as time goes on, let's say it were to take 2 years, and if we were assuming 20 million pounds, I know I just said a bunch of different numbers, but if we're assuming that it takes 2 more years at 20 million pounds a year, then an overshoot of 40 million pounds total, not per year, but an overshoot of 40 million pounds would take us back to the neutral level, which is today. So we're at a point, what I'm saying is we're at a point that the demand isn't disappearing, it's just moving from today to 2 years from today, or three, or so on. And I also want to point out quickly that if we're to assume that the price stays here beyond 2 years from now, 20 million pounds is probably generous in terms of the deficit, which will probably be increasing and increasing and increasing. Here's something to think about next time you have had a rough day in uranium world or are frustrated that the price isn't moving. We can quantify how much better tomorrow is. You just need to put in your number, the deficit that is, either today's deficit or 2 years down the line's deficit, approximately, and you can get how much better tomorrow is. If your number is 10 million pound deficit, well, tomorrow is 27,397 pounds of uranium that's gone and not being replaced, and that will be demanded above whatever the demand is someday. Whereas if your number is closer to 25 million pounds, well, then that your day is 68,000 pounds better. And that works out to about 480,000 pounds per week. So as time goes on, this is demand that's not disappearing, it's just moving. So to conclude this rather rambly and situational video, I hope this better explains how, even given a very defined scenario, the turn could have easily already been here, and it seems like it should be soon. However, it could, in theory, still be a while. I hope that better explains my stance, as well as me saying it gets better by the day, and I actually mean that. So I hope you enjoyed this, and if you enjoyed this rather lengthy ramble of mine, you should know I just started a blog. I have no idea how often I'll post or what type of things I'll post, but sometimes there's something that I just want to ramble on but doesn't feel right for a video, and so that will be there. Check out the link in the description. I hope everyone enjoyed this or found it interesting at the very least, and have a great day.